Hello, I am Meghan Gage Finn, and I serve this congregation and community as the Senior Associate Pastor here at Westminster. It is good to be together this evening, and welcome to this space, and welcome to this conversation. We are grateful that you're here this evening. Please take the time after the program to enjoy our spaces tour, the art gallery, stop by the library, and of course, enjoy breads and spreads and continuing being together in conversation in the Commons area and Westminster Hall. Thank you. And now it is my pleasure to welcome the Town Hall Forum's director, Tane Danger.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Westminster Town Hall Forum. Very excited to have you all here for a tremendous evening with legendary journalist Michele Norris. So, as was mentioned, my name is Tane Danger. I serve as director of the forum. If you have never been to the Westminster Town Hall Forum before, welcome. This is absolutely a wonderful, beautiful, amazing group of people who are here tonight, and we are so grateful to have every single one of you here in person, as well as watching on our live stream tonight. The Town Hall Forum has been doing this, bringing people together around big ideas with inspiring speakers since 1980. Our mission is to invite voices of conscience to address the issues of the day from an ethical perspective. The advisory board of the forum chose the theme of seeking truth for our spring 2024 season. All of the forum's programs, like tonight, are free and open to all, and that, I can't underscore enough, is made possible by folks like you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'll say we have support this season from a few folks I want to do a special thank you for. So our spring season is being supported by Mortensen Companies, who is helping with the entire spring season on Seeking Truth. The Minnesota Humanities Center, the Minneapolis Foundation, Minnesota Public Radio, MinnPost, and Sahan Journal. Thank you to all of them. Now, some folks, if you've gotten some of my emails and things about tonight's program, you know it's a little different. We have something really special in store for you because we have a team of amazing readers who are going to help bring to the stage some of what is in Michele Norris's new book, Our Hidden Conversations. And so we're going to bring them up on stage in a few moments, but right now, their names are all in your programs, but just to give them their due, and I'll read all their names and then give them a big round of applause at the end. Thank you to all these folks for being part of tonight's program. Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, Heidi Adelsman, Roxane Battle, Sheletta Brundidge, Bill Kiffmeyer, Patricia Lopez, Kerri Miller, R.T. Rybak, Jasmine Brett Stringer, Laysha Ward, Tom Weber, Lizz Winstead, Winston and Boua Xiong. I am so happy and grateful to have all of you here. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being part of this tonight. All right, here we go. I'm so excited for this evening. Michele Norris is one of America's most trusted voices in journalism. Her voice will be familiar to many people because from 2002 to 2012, she was a co-host of NPR's All Things Considered. Before joining NPR, Norris spent almost 10 years as a reporter for ABC News. She also worked as a staff writer for the Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, and the Los Angeles Times. She has earned numerous honors over a long career, including Peabody, Emmy, DuPont, and Goldsmith Awards. Now, I will say, we are very proud in Minnesota to say a lot of that story started here, because Michele Norris grew up not far at all from here in Minneapolis. She attended Washburn High School and the University of Minnesota. Today, she is a columnist for the Washington Post opinion section and the host of the Audible original podcast, Your Mama's Kitchen. Her first book, The Grace of Silence, was named one of the best books of the year by the San Francisco Chronicle, the Christian Science Monitor, and the Kansas City Star. Michele Norris is the founding director of the Race Card Project, a Peabody Award-winning narrative archive which people around the world have used to share their reflections on identity in just 6 words. The Race Card Project has collected hundreds of thousands of stories, as diverse and complex as America itself. Those stories, along with in-depth reporting and essays, come together in Michele Norris's new book, Our Hidden Conversations: What Americans Really Think About Race and Identity. And that is a lot of what she is going to share with us tonight. Now, before I bring Michele Norris up on stage, I mentioned a lot of this got started here in Minnesota. And one of the folks who was really a big supporter and gave a platform for this project in the very early days was NPR's own Kerri Miller. Kerri Miller is the host of Big Books and Bold Ideas on NPR. And to help us welcome Michele Norris to the Westminster Town Hall Forum, I wanted to invite Kerri Miller up to just share a little bit about those early days with the Race Card Project. So please, a round of applause for Kerri Miller.
Yes, you can listen to it on the radio, but there's nothing like being here in person, is there? Shoulder to shoulder, having this experience together, being unguarded, being vulnerable, being aware, and being in the presence of Michele Norris. It doesn't get any better than this, so it's good to have you here. In 2011, as Tane said, the city of Minneapolis chose Michele's memoir, The Grace of Silence, as its one Minneapolis, one read. So Michele and I met on a stage at the Guthrie Theater in the Round to talk about the book. Near the end of the evening, Michele invited the audience to condense an impression about race into 6 words and write them down on a card. Now, I have to tell you, I was thrilled to be sitting on the stage and not getting this assignment because a buzz went through the audience. This was new. You know, Michele was still kind of conceiving this. People weren't sure what this was going to be. And then people filled out their cards, and then they rose to start declaiming some of what they had written. You could hear in the moment the searching and the seeking and the quest to be understood, and I think the aspiration to be vulnerable. I think people were willing to do that, and it felt like the kind of space in which you could do that. Michele said recently, the cards reveal the way America is sometimes in conversation with itself without even knowing it. So let's tonight be open and aware and vulnerable and unguarded, and let's get this conversation started. Please welcome Michele Norris to the stage of the Westminster.
I feel like clicking my heels. There's no place like home. And I really do mean that. I told a group earlier, I left Minnesota, but Minnesota never left me. And it's sort of true about this project also. It grew and it's flourished, but its original soil in many ways was here. And it has found fertilizer here. And it has found support here. So thanks to everybody who helped us get this off the ground. Thanks to Mayor Rybak, who's one of our readers, who invited us to bring The Grace of Silence to the city. Thanks to the folks at King Park who invited us back when they were trying to figure out how to find each other, when they were divided about a dog park. It got deep. It got deep. And we came together at Turtlebread Bakery, and we used those 6-word stories to help people find each other. Thanks to everybody who sponsored this program tonight in particular, but to those who sponsor the forum in general. This forum is special. I travel the country. I live in Washington, D.C. There's not enough of this in America, where people come together and listen to ideas. People come and sit shoulder to shoulder, and it's a blessing to know that we can do this, particularly after COVID, and we will never take this for granted. I'm here tonight as a longtime journalist, which means I'm a storyteller, but in the last chapter of my career, I have become a story collector also, and now in some ways a story defender. Because there are a lot of people who are trying to shut down conversation. There are a lot of people who are trying to take our stories from us, in some cases take our histories from us. This started with 6 words. I had written a very open book about my family's complex racial legacy. Some of my family members are here tonight. Raise your hands if you're in the audience. I see a few of you. My family rolls deep. Thank you very much for being here tonight. Love you all. And when I wrote that book, I thought, I usually spend so much time locked in a studio. It was a chance to get out into America to have a conversation. And I knew since I wrote a book about race, I'd be asking people to talk about race. And I didn't think that was a conversation that people were interested in, so I had to create an on-ramp, an entry point, and that's where those little postcards came in. They all were simple. Race, your thoughts, 6 words, please send. And they first started to come in as a trickle and then a torrent, and now we have officially archived more than 500,000 of these cards. They don't just come in on postcards. We created a website now, theracecardproject.com, because we thought the stories were so interesting that we wanted to make sure that people could see them. And we then began collecting stories digitally. So now what you see in the book are the stories that come in primarily digitally, but we still love the postcards because I just love seeing people. I love seeing their handwriting. I love to see the way they cross things out. When you get the card, because you can cut and paste. You don't see the thought process when it comes in digitally. So I miss the postcards, but I appreciate when people send their cards now in through the online submissions. They can enhance them because we added 2 words, anything else. So people send their 6-word stories, and then they send backstories. And then sometimes they send in photos. You got to see another dimension of their humanity. They were sending childhood photos because they were still adjudicating something that happened to them years ago. They were sending photos that told a part of their story. They were fishing, they were camping, they were on vacation. They were a blended family. And you see this beautiful blended family, and the 6 words are, no, I'm their mom, not the nanny. Lots and lots of cards that come in like this. So after archiving all these cards, I've learned a lot of lessons, and I'll talk about some of that with Tane, and I can't wait to get into that conversation. But one of the big lessons I've learned as a communicator is that the conversations that we have about race that are held in the public square, that are led by the members of the press corps and the media, that it's very different than the conversation that is happening closer to the ground. This is a taproot for me, to be able to hear conversations that are otherwise unavailable to me. I liken it in the book to growing up in Minneapolis in a working class neighborhood in the South Side, in a community where a lot of people didn't have air conditioning. So what'd you do in the summer? You threw the windows open. Sometimes you had sleeping porches out back, and I remember riding my Stingray bicycle with the banana seat and the handlebars that went out like this. My friend Heidi's with me. You remember we had those bikes? We used to buzz around, and we had alleys in our neighborhood. So you could buzz up and down the alleys, and in the summer, when the windows were open, you heard everybody's life. You heard all their business because the windows were open. That's what this project is like to me. Roaming through America's neighborhoods when the windows are open and you can hear what people really think because they're inviting us in to their lives, talking about the things that you usually don't hear. So I'm going to invite the ensemble up here, and they are going to help us hear something that is normally not available to us. As you listen to this, course of 6-word stories. Understand that I'm a writer, and I wrote a big, long book. But the stories included in that book are not just mine. I wrote a dozen essays, but I included hundreds of stories that come from the people. These are their stories. So the 6 words that you're about to hear, all of these, this chorus, this symphony of 6-word stories, they come from Americans in all 50 states. They are part of a conversation that you normally don't get to hear, because many of the people who are saying these things out loud to me have said, I've never said this before. I've never had an opportunity to say this before. So that hidden conversation in America, the one you kind of know is out there, but you usually don't get to hear, this is what it sounds like. It matters, like it or not.
Respect runs in a circular motion.
Race does not exist by itself.
Race is everything, but it's nothing.
Today's soft segregation still harms everyone.
Black wears me wherever I go.
Does not define who I am.
I admit to unconscious racial bias.
Stereotype is a shackle, broke mine.
Suit, degree, still afraid of me?
Still working harder than others are.
I am fortunate to be Caucasian.
The point of it all? Power.
Get your seats off our neck.
Blacks complain constantly despite obvious progress.
But I voted for Barack Obama.
Colors run together. Why can't people?
I hear my grandfather's hateful words.
Think Dr. Seuss's in the Sneetches.
Pay no attention to the packaging.
I am still not from Vietnam.
Please stop saying I am articulate.
Do articulate whites also impress you?
Diversity don't count if it's white.
Presumed understanding is worse than ignorance.
What if classrooms can't change racism?
Not Chinese. You must be Japanese. I bet they're good at math.
What do you mean, you people?
I'm not like the rest.
Easy to assume I am guilty.
Terrified you assume I'm judging you?
Hardest jails to escape are gateless.
Pride or crutch? Please describe now.
Sometimes I'm angry at white people.
Am I failing my Latino son?
I am not like my parents.
Talking about racism creates more racism.
I really like a black guy.
I'm a girl, not a fantasy.
To you, always the exotic other.
I am more than just white. Didn't sound Chinese on the phone.
Really? But you don't look Mexican.
I thought you would be taller.
Thank God it's a white woman.
Every now and then, I remember.
Grandparents passed. New tree, no roots.
White, whatever I do is wrong.
Angry black men are so scary.
Embarrassed that I'm frightened by black boys.
Minority obsession and majority guilt trip. Stop seeing my son as a predator.
I was taught to fear others.
Everyone's racist in their own way.
Always putting other people at ease.
You don't have to whisper black.
There's nothing wrong with my hair.
Got tired of straightening my hair.
My natural hair isn't a statement.
Yeah, but you're not black.
I'm light-skinned. My black is harder.
Red hair gets the most stares.
Black kid in my math class?
People can hear the unspoken words.
Just stop making everything about race.
Repeating proper pronunciation hurts my feelings. Can't pronounce my name? Try harder.
Born in America, I am American.
You don't know what I believe.
Wouldn't have been white 100 years ago.
So much depends on so little.
Son upset, called white boy on bus.
Why must our differences be so wrong?
This old wound will never heal.
No, I did not steal that.
I'm only racist when I'm at Walmart.
Never eat fried chicken in public.
Underneath, we all taste like chicken.
It's hard being a white friend.
You're Mexican, but we're so similar.
Not a legal human and deserving of compassion.
Not all Mexicans do landscaping.
Please, Hispanic isn't a race.
You're white and you can dance?
The only Jew on Easter Sunday.
I'm not just Caucasian, I'm Caucasian.
You feel superior, but you're not.
Since when am I a racist?
Why'd you invite the white guy?
And you wonder why I'm mad.
Worry I will say the wrong thing?
We are all in this together.
Native. No one knows I'm passing.
I feel uncomfortable with you here.
Nobody's a racist, yet racism persists.
Would all my ancestors love me? Is that all your real hair?
You love God, but not me.
You're here because of affirmative action.
No, I am not the exception.
I feel uncomfortable with you here.
Racism deniers are the worst racists.
Stop thinking black. Start thinking human.
Can't be colorblind and see me.
Yes, I am really her mom.
Is Jewish a religion or a race?
I don't see you as Muslim.
Equating white with racist is racism.
Native Americans, voiceless in race conversations.
Married, male, 65, gray, overweight, invisible.
You've got to be carefully taught.
Got to stop thinking this way.
Sometimes stereotypes are true. Face it.
Puerto Rican, but everyone thinks I'm Mexican.
I'm Polish, not a joke.
Race, a weapon of mass destruction.
Progressives always gloss over the truth.
Conservatives distort truth to promote agenda.
Spoke the truth, burned at the stake.
White people continue to disappoint.
Black people don't forget the past.
Asked for equality, got integration.
You don't look Jewish to me.
No, my name is not Maria.
What is that on your head?
Taiwanese American who wants to understand. I don't think I'll ever understand.
Understand that you will never understand.
Hispanic doctor is not an oxymoron.
Yes, white skin and still Mexican.
Henry is seen, Enrique is invisible.
A clear head start for some.
Insane how racists try so hard.
White woman trying to do better.
Why do black people destroy neighborhoods?
My name doesn't predict my upbringing.
Why is your baby so brown?
I heard your dad is black.
But where is your real daddy?
Two communities, neither one mine.
It's tough being a mutt.
White immigrant. Never asked where I'm from.
I have an accent, so what?
So I should just check other?
I'm sorry I'm staring at you.
Silence as I enter the room.
Stop pretending your racism is patriotism.
Racism. Destroying America. Putin, see, laughing.
We're all different, and it's beautiful.
The house I did not build.
Quick to judge, slow to understand.
Let the past be the past.
I will not ruin your bloodline.
Can I love who I want?
Korean. Marries in Italian in Chinese garden.
Rebecca, black maid, taught me love.
A terrible, unnecessary barrier against love.
Mommy, why can't we play together?
Beautiful differences made ugly by fear.
His parents will never meet me.
A smoldering volcano with periodic eruption.
Number 1, don't talk about White Club.
Was he Dot or Feather Indian?
Native. No one knows I'm passing.
Yet, still to America you come.
Blood is always the same color.
Being comfortable is my unearned luxury.
I'm not ignorant. I'm just indifferent.
I am white, I am listening.
Race, America, deep scars, tall fences.
Our untold stories keep us separate.
Checked cosmic in the race box.
Total non-issue when the aliens arrive.
There's only one race, human race.
One race matters, the human race.
Race is only in the mind.
Humans' DNA is 99% the same.
Race is forever. Prejudice is not. Not real, still messes with us.
Not real. Still messes with us. Please thank our ensemble and let them take a bow. It took a lot of courage to stand up there and read this, so big thanks to them. Thank you so much. I love all of you.
With that, we are going to move into the second part of our program, and so I know we're doing a lot of applauding. I think that it's important to do one more time as we welcome Michele Norris up here to share in a little bit of conversation. Thank you so much for being here. I want to acknowledge on the very front end how much work this is. 14 years of doing this, and members of the race card team are here, and I understand that there's a lot that goes into it, and it is tremendous, and this is a tremendous book, and it is a tremendous project that you have been doing. So thank you. I guess that one of the questions I wanted to start with: why does this work? 6 words in inviting people to do something that you yourself in the book write about. You assume people absolutely would not want to talk about race, and yet they do in huge numbers. And so I'm curious if as you reflect on it, what has made this possible?
Well, I have to admit that I created this project based on a mistake. I thought no one wanted to talk about race. I don't think that anymore. Even people who write to us and say, "Can it just be over? Why do we talk about race all the time?" And then they send 6 words and then a really long essay. So, I understand race fatigue is real, but I think people are looking for a place to have their say, to feel like they are seen, heard, and valued. And sometimes they feel like the conversation about race doesn't include them. I think the 6 words work because it's simple. Tane, if I had asked for a sentence, people would get slick and try to give me 15 words, give me a paragraph.
A lot of semicolons.
A lot of semicolons. It would be a paragraph masquerading as a sentence. And then if I asked for a paragraph, people would say, "Oh, I don't have time for that. That sounds like a essay, like a mandate." But 6 words is easy. I mean, it feels almost like a game. How do I get it down to 6 words? But I think it works also because it makes you think, what's most important to me? What is the center of the story that I want to tell? And I think the other reason it works is modeling. A key moment. And can we just have a round of applause for one person in particular? Melissa Bear is here with me tonight. She was here with me. Where are you, Melissa? Can you just stand up?
The Race Card Project.
We have been together since I wrote the first book. She's, as I heard today, the wheels on the bus, the gas in the tank, the upholstery on the seats, the whole thing. And she had really pushed to create a website, and we needed to put it out there. It was almost, I think it was Ellen Ailey said, the dance comes from the people, so you have to give it back to the people. The stories came from the people, so we had to give this back to the people. And when people would see through modeling, oh, I can say this in 6 words, I can do this, and I think that's why so many white Americans have submitted stories. I think that's why maybe people felt comfortable, and that modeling piece has been really instructive for me, and I talk about this whenever I get a chance to, Tane, because I think it helps us understand that through modeling we can figure out how to do hard things. I was told no one wants to talk about race. It was just a core assumption of mine. But through modeling, I think this is a model. I hope that you build a national audience for this, much like Austin City Limits or something like that, where people are watching. Remember Austin City Limits? Where people are watching all over the country, because I think it can be done. And if they see that it can be done, it's that what Jesse used to say, if you can see it, you can achieve it. And I think that's one of the reasons that 6 words work.
There's a complication in that people, for me, as I was reading the book, in that people submit their stories, and they're often submitting stories that they have not said to other people. Yeah. Arlene Lee is one of the folks, and she has a story, which if folks get the book, they can read in detail, about a very complicated family story. Her mother keeping a secret about her father's identity for many, many years. And that is something that I believe they never totally got to a place that they could talk about it, and yet she was willing to send that in as a story.
Yeah.
And there's something really interesting to me about the ways that it is almost harder to talk to someone that you love about some of this stuff than it is to talk about it in a project like this.
Yeah, like she told me some of this before she told her kids, before she told other people. And there are examples in the book also of people who sent stories to the Race Card Project in the same household. Father and daughter, they didn't know that they both sent stories. Husband and wife sent stories in. And then I put them together, and they heard one of the segments on NPR and sent their stories in. Maybe this project will become less necessary or less potent or less appealing as people open up and start talking more. But until they do, they're looking for that place where they can have this conversation. Arlene is someone who is, I've talked to her, the benefit of doing this work over 14 years is that I've talked to people over years, over many cases over a decade. She is a woman who was raised white. And I say raised white because her mother is white and Peruvian. A white Hispanic woman, white Latino woman. Her father was white, and as she explained, very intolerant. And she discovers when her mother dies, her mother implores her to go to this safe and find a birth certificate. So her mom didn't talk about it, but yet she's leaving breadcrumbs. That's the name of the chapter, it's breadcrumbs. She's leaving breadcrumbs. She goes to the safe, and she finds not one birth certificate, but two. And it turned out that when Mom came to America, she shaved several years off her age, and she was a good-looking woman, so she could do that. She could be younger. She changed the marital status of her parents. On the original birth certificate, it showed that her parents were not married. She was born out of wedlock. And that the father that she thought was long gone, invisible, was a black man, was a black Peruvian. And so over this period of 13 years, I've been talking to her about what it means to discover that she's a woman of color. And, it explained the hair, she said. She spent a lifetime trying to tame her hair. And she's like, oh, now I get it. But, she discovers this when Barack Obama is president. And she feels one kind of way about being, having these conversations. Then is kind of trying to search for her identity when Donald Trump is president. And then now trying to lead conversations around this in the community that she lives in and the place that she works at a moment when there are battles over diversity, equity, inclusion programs, and a fight against so-called CRT. So she's experienced not just the vertigo of discovering that she is part black, but what it means to be black at different moments in America, which is also instructive because race is not something of, that fixed certitude. You check a box and it's always one thing. It can change because you change. It can also change because the world changes.
I mean, I was going to wait to ask you this question until later, but it seems appropriate now. You've been doing this work for 14 years. Has it gotten harder?
Well, it's gotten, I'm not going to pretend that this is hard work. It's to spend every day talking to people about an emotionally laden subject and I've learned, to practice self-care, to take walks, to take care of my heart, and my mind a little bit. It's also hard because of the volume. I'm just going to be, honest about that. I mean, we run an archive that we now take seriously. We hope that storytellers of the future will be able to reach to this archive and understand this really interesting moment in America. I liken it in the book to dendrochronology, the study of tree rings. If you cut a tree ring down, the tree ring is going to tell you a story. And it's going to tell you about the surrounding environment. It's going to tell you about weather. It's going to tell you about whether humans introduce toxins in the environment. And I liken the archive to social dendrochronology. This archive, which is bookended by the presidencies of Barack Obama and Joe Biden, with Donald Trump in the middle, and then punctuated by a global pandemic, the killing of George Floyd not far away from here, economic tumult, climate change, technological upheaval. People are going to study the moment that we're living in. And what I would give to have an archive like this to study a previous era in America, so we realize that we are stewards of something, that we are conservators of not just people's truth, but of a moment in history. So when you say it's hard, yes, we have to carefully archive everything, carefully tag everything, make sure that we're maintaining it. So that's another example of me becoming a story defender, that I'm protecting this so that it will live, so that it will outlive me. So that's the sort of physical aspect of the difficulty. But the other thing is absorbing, being a sponge, for other people's anxieties, triumph sometimes, laments often, anthems, questions, and I try not to see it as a burden because it doesn't feel like a burden to me. It feels really like an opportunity. And if you're doing work that you really love, you just make sure that you get the rest so you can do it. And you just make sure that you maintain yourself, you nourish yourself, you sustain yourself so that you can, get up and keep doing the work. And every time I think, oh, it's hard, I think, not compared to so much work that other people do. It feels really, to me, like a gift that I get to do this and that I get to share it with you.
In that spirit of modeling, and pulling it to the piece you talked about, that this book, the project, is bookended by some major events that have happened in our country. And you talk about that you can see those in the stories, but they come through people's personal stories of themselves and their families and their identities. And so it's not somebody saying explicitly, like commenting on something they read in the news, but when one of those things happens, you can start to see that almost like, as you mentioned, show up in the tree ring. And I wonder if there is something instructive of that, of how we talk to each other, that maybe we get too much into what's happening in the news and we lose track of the personal.
Yeah, I mean, a perfect example is George Floyd. If you go to the Race Card Project website and we have a search function, and if you put in George Floyd's name, you're going to get some stories, but given the volume of stories that we saw in 2020 that came into the website, you would think that his name would populate the website much more. But when people are writing about something like that, they write about their son. They write about going to work and not knowing what to say to a coworker. They write about, you know, they are worried about that young woman who took the video, you know, and they wonder whether they would have the courage to do the same thing. A perfect example of that is, it's in the book, it's in a chapter, I Wish He Was a Girl. And it was sent in by a woman named Kristen Moorhead. And she sent that story in on the day, y'all remember Tamir Rice? And you remember the day when the grainy footage was released where you saw the police officers approach this child in front of a gazebo and he's killed. And they thought he had a gun. Didn't. She saw that video and was so anguished because Tamir Rice was the same age as her son. Her son's in the bedroom. She is just so worried, so tired, because if you remember, this was a daisy chain of these killings. And she was crying and she was trying to muffle her cries. She goes to the computer. She too had heard one of the segments on NPR, and she types in, I wish he was a girl. And years later, I bring the two of them together and she explains to him why she said that she didn't wish away his gender or wish away his presence in her life, but she was just so worried about him. And I'm talking to the two of them, and he's explaining to her, you know, how he lives his life, and it's sort of the talk in reverse. And so that was an example. She didn't write a story about Tamir Rice. She wrote about something inside her life, and that happens whenever, you know, that happens often when there's a hiccup in the news around a crisis at the border, Muslim bans, the siege at the Capitol. You know, someone writes in, all the racists look like me. Now, he doesn't, which, you know, I wonder what triggered that. I wonder what he saw. And it's a white gentleman who is talking about the assumptions that are made about him. And that's, you know, one of the lessons that you learn. We talk about assumptions made about people, stereotypes. We assume you're talking about stereotypes that are laid on people of color. But one of the things that, you know, the majority, we should just say this, the majority of the stories that we've archived in 14 years of doing this, in the majority of the years, the majority of the stories have come from white Americans. That stunned me. It was a conversation about race. I just did not expect that many white Americans to pull up. And I say in the book, you know, I never thought I would be embarking on a 14-year odyssey of listening to white Americans talk about race. I just didn't even think that was possible, right? And yet, I'm so glad that so many did pull up to the table, because white America is usually not part of the conversation. If you're going to have a conversation about race, I mean, we're in February, let's be real. I'm a journalist. I am so popular in the month of February. My phone just is popping all the time. People who would not call me any other time of the year, I have the idea, why don't you do a 6-part series? You know, they're not interested in October. They're not interested in June, but suddenly in February. And so when we have these conversations about race, and you know from the media, from watching the news, from listening to the radio, from reading the television, or reading the newspaper, that there are certain people that are called again and again and again. And we don't call white America enough to say, tell me about this. What do you think about this? There was a shooting in upstate New York, a horrible, you know, someone goes to a black neighborhood on purpose and kills people when they're just trying to buy hamburger and toilet paper. And again, we go to find black people talk about the element. Well, wait, this is a white guy that did this. Why don't we bring in white people to talk about, you know, the roots of hatred? Let's interrogate that too. And this is a reminder to me that we need to widen the aperture in these conversations and make sure that more people are included, because many of the people who do come to share their story have said that they feel like in other places they don't have a chance to do this.
So one of the things you write in the book, I think this is a direct quote there, people want a space where they can share stories without rebuke, that they want to be able to share their stories. And I read that and I was like, that is absolutely true, and that seems like potentially a very, very hard thing to be consistent about, because there's a piece where we are all sometimes, we feel an almost moral obligation at times to feel like it's our job to rebuke something that we hear because it rings the wrong way or they use the wrong word. And so how do you hold those two things? What do we do with that?
I think a lot of people, in fact, I know a lot of people come here because they can put something on the table, they can say something, and no one's going to wag a finger at them, and no one's going to bark at them, and no one's going to judge them. However, if we're going to figure out how to listen to each other, we need to figure out how to do it in spaces like this. We need to figure out how to do it in communities. We need to figure out how to do it in the workplace. We need to figure out how to do it sometimes in our families, because, I mean, you've all been to Thanksgiving where come on now, right? So we need to figure out how to do that. And although we're looking for places where we can speak without rebuke, we also have to get used to staying in spaces when there is rebuke. And figuring out how to keep people at the table even when things get a little rocky. And so when people ask me, how do I do this in a community? Think about the rules of engagement. Think about whether or not you can set up something where we're going to say it might get a little uncomfortable, but let's figure out how to get comfortable with the discomfort. Let's just say that even if it gets uncomfortable, as long as there are not any kind of ad hominem attacks, as long as there are no threats, we're going to figure out how to stay at the table. Because guess what? That's what you do at Thanksgiving, right? When Uncle Earl says something, I don't know if you have an Uncle Earl in your family, but you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Everybody has an Uncle Earl in their family
you
somewhere.
You have some where and it's just like, oh man. If you saw that episode of The Bear, they stayed at the table. People were throwing forks and they still stayed at the table. So if we can figure out how to do that in the community of man and woman and families and communities, and to say that, we're going to stay at the table and maybe set rules of engagement. And part of that also is telling people at the outset, it might get a little rocky. And that's okay. People are looking for safe spaces. What I have learned is that we need to look for brave spaces.
So I wanted to. So there's a chapter in the book that is actually built around a couple of stories that come out of Morris, Minnesota, or around Morris, the area around Morris, Minnesota. And it's very interesting because to me, it's a beautiful illustration of this project and this work in two people with very different identities and backgrounds, thinking and grappling with some similar themes of history and present and context. So I'll read the two 6-word stories, and then we can talk about them. So the first, and I won't say anything about them, I'll just read them to start. I flourish farming ancient tribal lands. And then the second one is Dakota, Lakota, native, land, pride, immigrant. Mm-hmm. And these were, so one of these is a gentleman who inherited a family farm in Morris, Minnesota, and is grappling with what does that mean to be working that land, that he is aware of the history there. And the other one is from a young woman who was a student at the University of Minnesota Morris, is Dakota Lakota herself, and is in her own way grappling with what does it mean to be part of this community now. And those two things are in conversation. You put them into conversation in this book.
And they were in the same room at the same time. They don't know each other. I spoke at Morris, and those two cards came in from that evening. They both were in the audience. Mariah sent her card in right away, and she's from South Dakota, lives in a reservation there, school teacher there now. And Ed Kaufman kept his card and sent it in 2 years later, which is interesting. I don't know if he found it in a drawer or had it on a bulletin board or, whatever, but sent it in 2 years later. And when I started talking, because I reach in and do oral histories with people, and so when I reached in, I realized, wait a minute, they were in the same room. So I don't want to give too much away because you'll read it, but she is descended from people who were forced off the land. Forced marched, literally off the land after the War of 1862. The federal government was victorious. That was part of the deal, was that they had to leave and they were sent to reservations in South Dakota. He sent in 2 6-word stories when he sent his in. He had 2 years to think about it, so he sent in 2. And his second 6 words were great-great-grandfather stood witness at Mankato. You know what I'm talking about. The mass hanging of 38 Lakota. So he fought in the war, stood witness on that morning when 38 men were hanged, and after that, her family were part of the people who were forced off the land. And she is the person who feels like she's an immigrant, even though this is her indigenous land. So it was an opportunity for me. A lot of these stories are entry points or opportunities for me to do deep research. So in the essays that I write, I start with 6 words and they're launch points. And so for me, I just kept digging and digging and digging and digging. I was very well educated here in Minnesota. Some of the best schools in the country here in the state, went to college here. I learned all kinds of things I did not know, was not taught to me, did not know it. I talk about the high school that I attended, Ramsey High School, county named for Ramsey, and I learned about what the name Ramsey means and how there were, he is the one who put out an order that, that if you came with a scalp, you got a certain amount of money, and, it was deep. I don't want to give too much of it away, but it was interesting. But, one of the upshots is that when you grow up in Minnesota, these Indian names are all around you. Our state, our city, our streets, our high schools, our teams. And the one thing that really hit me was, whoa, the name Minnesota, the name derives from the people that we drove from the land. Like, you got to go, but your language is kind of pretty, so we're going to keep the name. And I was not taught that. And I decided to do deep dive research and just, wanted to write what I think is a beautiful essay about what I learned, and that I hope will be an invitation for us to lean into that history, as difficult as it is, and learn more about it, especially at a moment where there are people who are trying to prevent us from looking over our shoulder at this history. And, I don't think we can outrun it, and I don't think we should.
This is the part we're going to start opening it up for you all to ask your questions. And so you do have a card to write a question down, which we'd encourage you to start doing right now. While you all are doing that, I'll just do a quick little bit of housekeeping. So if you're just tuning in, this is the Westminster Town Hall Forum coming to Westminster Presbyterian Church in downtown Minneapolis. My name's Tane Danger, and our guest this evening is award-winning journalist Michele Norris. Our co-sponsors who are helping make this evening possible, Mortenson Company sponsoring our entire spring season, the Minnesota Humanities Center, whose mission is to spark positive change by increasing collective understanding of ourselves, our communities, and our histories through stories and experience, and the Minneapolis Foundation. They work to drive collective action to strong, vibrant communities. We're also grateful, as I mentioned at the top, to Minnesota Public Radio for recording and broadcasting all these town hall forums, to MinPost, a nonprofit community-supported newsroom. Their coverage of critical issues, challenges, and opportunities facing Minnesota is at minpost.com. And Sahan Journal. Learn more and see their coverage at sahanjournal.com. So we've got a microphone here and a microphone here. Mary and David will help with those. And then meanwhile, our ushers are bringing the rest of the questions forward to our collectors up here. So yes, please start lining up, and we'll do it that way. I'll ask, you alluded in a couple of ways to the story of the Race Card Project early on here in Minneapolis with the park at MLK Park. And I'm wondering if you can just maybe say, like, kind of fill out the tail end of that story of why you think that telling these stories helped make the actual public policy problem there easier to tackle.
Because people got in opposing camps and just kind of folded their arms. And then you were talking about not necessarily neighbors, but you were talking about those people. And when they came together and actually got to talk about that, one of the things they learned is that, you know, some of the older black residents who came to Minnesota, Minneapolis, often from the South, dogs, the idea that you would bring dogs in particular to the park. You know, they still remember when dogs and hoses were turned on protesters in the South. That it was a chance to talk it through in a way. And I think the stories, the personal stories, made it easier for them to talk about sort of the big policy issues. And something beautiful came out of that. If you've ever been to that park, they decided to go all in, and they created the most beautiful park for kids. Mm-hmm. The jungle gym that you climb on, that kids, you know, hang on, it looks like the Edmund Pettus Bridge. It actually is the architecture of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. The little climbing wall that kids climb, they're climbing the mountaintop that Dr. King talked about. The little choo-choo train that you often see at kids' parks, it talks about, I think his first name was Elijah McCoy. You've heard the phrase, the real McCoy. It was basically because a man of color invented this very particular piece on a steam engine that allowed oil drip to, you know, capture the oil. I'm not even going to pretend like I understand exactly how it works. But it was so efficient that was the phrase, the real McCoy. Everybody wanted this equipment, this piece of equipment that the black guy made, that he held the patent for. So something really beautiful came out of that.
I don't think Michele would say this for herself. Another piece of that park is that the steps that take children up onto the playground is a series of books that are written by African-American authors, W.E.B. Du Bois, Maya Angelou, and Michele Norris. Okay. Right here, do you mind saying your name? And yes, thank you.
Hi, Michele. My name is Sharon Steinhoff-Smith. I'm from New Prague. And my question is, do you feel the media is at all complicit in keeping the discussion of race on a soundbite level?
I do. And I don't take pleasure in saying that. I do. You know, part of it is a function of time. To have a really deep, the most productive conversations about race in America are usually the ones that you don't hear. They don't take place in newsrooms. Maybe they take place in forums like this, but they usually happen at a table somewhere. They're at the edge of a soccer field. They're in a church basement. They're over a plate of something somewhere. They're in a tavern. They're in a sports center. And that's not normally what happens in a newsroom. I think that there also sometimes are perverse incentives to create sort of he said, she said. It's good for ratings. Yeah. It's not necessarily good for our public discourse.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, and I still think you should support the, you know, news, but I think that this is a case where newsrooms have been imperfect in our quest to figure out how to talk about, you know, these issues, and how to figure out how to do it in a way that is courageous and accurate and moves beyond pithy sound bites.
And now we're losing more reporters.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Come over on this side.
Okay. Hi, my name is Kay Bokert, and I live in Edina. We adopted a mixed black baby, and then we adopted a mixed Korean baby. Okay, so this was in the 70s, and I like to talk about these issues, but I can't talk to anybody about it. And my daughters have experienced tremendous anger, and just especially my Korean daughter, who works in an emergency room, and people come in and they say, "You're the one that brought this disease," thinking she's Chinese, and they go to attack her, and she has to remove herself, and people have to surround her because she is Asian. But as a mother, I'm sitting here and I'm just crying and crying and crying. Who can I talk to about this? Because as a mother, it kills me. It just, deep inside, I just feel so much fear for them.
Thank you for telling your story, Kay. I appreciate your courage in telling the room tonight. Do you talk about it inside your family?
No. Not much. There's, I mean, I'm the only one of the four of us that want to talk about it, so.
The other family members don't want to talk about it, but you need to. It sounds like you.
Yes,
you
I'm
need
the
to.
mother.
Yeah.
And I've lived with it, and my whole life changed the minute I adopted them. And of course, I have a husband too, but I'm talking for myself.
Hi.
But, you know, people will say, oh, they'll be okay, they'll be safe. I don't, or they don't want to. I can't talk about it even with some of my best friends.
Yeah. I hope you find a space where you can talk about it.
Thank you.
I do. And I hope actually in some humble way that this book helps create those spaces. I tell the story now of a friend of mine who had an early copy of the book. And they went away for a weekend with a family, and her sons are in relationships that are across either racial or cultural or religious lines. So everybody's kind of crossed a line in some way. And she left the book on the table all weekend. And people kept picking it up and having discussions based on, because the book is unusual.
Yeah.
It's not a traditional book. There's all kinds of little stories, big stories, essays, photos, and so you can just kind of pick it up and, it's okay to be Black Promise. I wasn't racist until BLM rioted. Okay, that's the beginning of a conversation, right? Often ashamed of being a white male, proud to be a slave's descendant. I mean, any one of these pages you pick up. So I kind of feel like this is kind of like a little bunker bomb that you can, leave and maybe will help kickstart conversations. But I also hope, and I say this with total respect, and I'm not telling you how to live your life, but sometimes it's hard for us, and particularly, and sorry if I'm saying something that's gendered, but it's sometimes hard for us as women to say what we need. And if you need to talk about it, it's okay to say that. Like, you all might not want to talk about this, but I need to talk about it. And because I'm thinking about the world I want my babies to inherit. And I'm thinking about the path that I want them to lead. And it's hard, to say that. And listen, racial fatigue is real, and I'm saying that people want to talk about race, but not everybody does. And not everybody knows how.
Right.
But if you turn it around and say, I have something that I want to talk about, and more often than not when that happens, they're going to have something to say too. They probably, and you might not like what they say, but they probably will have an observation or a place to say. And if it's not in your family, keep looking for that space, because I have a feeling there's someone out there, there's probably someone in this room who's going to approach you afterwards and say, here's my number. Yeah. I'm happy to talk to you about it.
Yes, I got it. Thank you. We got a few more folks lined up here, and I do have some questions on cards, but yes, please go ahead.
My name is Karen Steinhoff, and I'm from New Prague. My question is, in the time that you've been studying this, do you see any commonalities or parallels in how women talk about race versus how men talk about race?
I see more cards from women than men.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I'm not certain about that.
Okay.
I see more women than men. I see more women send in photos than men do. Now that I've written the book, I can go into the archive and start looking at things like that and sort of looking at patterns. It's one of the things that I do want to understand. I do see age differences. So younger people tend to talk about what they think. Older people who've lived a little bit, tend to talk about their lives, tend to talk about what they remember, what they've seen, what they have experienced. But yeah, I accept the assignment.
Good deal. Let me know how that works out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we got.
Hi, my name is Bill Engelhart, and I'm also a Washburn Miller. So,
Oh, hey.
And
It looks like a lot of them are in the room tonight.
yeah, so I teach at a diverse high school in the Twin Cities, and what I've noticed over the last several years is that, like at least from my vantage, it seems like the space has become a little safer to maybe vent the hurt and the anger, but then it seems like we're in this space now, and I wonder how the process begins to start the healing.
Healing takes time. It really does take time. You can't rush it. But I'm glad that you mentioned the venting, because that's a piece of the conversation we haven't talked about, is that if you're going to bring people together to try to have these conversations, you know, talk isn't enough. I mean, you have to think about how you order your steps in life, you know, and that's important too. But if people are going to have their say, there's usually a little cleanup after that, right? And so you have to kind of, that's part of the commitment to stay at the table, but maybe I should have also mentioned to come back to the table.
Yeah.
Because too often it's a one-time deal. Okay, we're gonna have it, and we all have been in workplaces where you're required to have your diversity training on a Tuesday, usually in February. And it's one time, and you know, and then we're done with that. We did that, and this
Check
is
that box.
yeah, check that box, move on. And this is the kind of work that requires a little bit more work than that. I'm glad you mentioned young people also, because the other thing that I have observed, if I can share this, and I write about this at the end of the book, is we make an assumption that it's going to be easier for young people to travel this path. We make this assumption that because they have inherited a world that is more integrated, where they listen to each other's music, and they date easily across color lines, and they see integration modeled and diversity modeled, that they will have it easier, and that has not been my experience. I think they have it maybe easier, but they don't have it easy. And my observation is that that is in some way our generation kicking the can down the road a little bit, like we didn't get it right, but I know you will. And I don't know that that's what we need to tell young people. I think we need to tell them that some form, and this may not be a popular thing what I'm about to say, but that some form of bias may always be with us. And I say that because some form of bias has always been with us. It may not have been racial bias, but people, we've collected cards from more than 100 countries. People figure out how to divide themselves all over the world over all kinds of things. Money, religion, access to water, geography. And so I now feel very strongly that we have to figure out how to teach young people how to be bridge builders and how to be leaders who can help people connect with each other and row together when they are divided, or maybe even when they despise each other, because that's what they're going to inherit. We live in a very divided moment, and we live in a moment where there are a lot of people who are invested in our divisions. Deeply invested in our divisions. And this is a skill. You know what I'm talking about. The divisions that we see, whether they're political, whether they're cultural, they show up in the workplace. You probably hear them in the teacher's lounge. You probably see it in the lunchroom at school. And in a workplace setting, it affects productivity, it affects our GDP, it affects our military readiness. This actually is something that is tearing the fabric of our country apart. And so we need a generation of leaders that, and I'm not talking about bringing people together on common ground, I'm talking about assuming that there probably is going to be a division in your workplace. And I know this because we do work in corporate settings, we do work on campuses, we've been to like large and small factories, and it's a problem there. If people don't trust each other, if people don't talk to each other, it means that something is wrong with the culture inside the factory, for instance, and that affects how productive you are. That affects whether you're able to meet your deliverable, right? If everybody is, you know, coming to work with their fist balled up and their jaw tight. So I think it's a skill that we need to actually acknowledge and elevate. I mean, I wish that there was something akin to a Nobel Prize for people who actually could bring people together and help them work across division. I think it's that important. And it's a message that we need to give to young people.
We have time for one more question over here, I believe. So
well, why don't you both ask the question and I'll try to answer.
Okay.
I'm not going to leave you out.
Sorry. Yeah.
I'm not going to leave you hanging.
So my name is Marquise Bowie, and I represent from inside the George Floyd Square. And my question is, how do we challenge, I'd say, our good-intended white allies that want to come and look but not really be involved?
Okay, we're going to take the second question and I'll answer them both at once, if that's okay.
Mine isn't a question, it's an encouragement. You mentioned something about doing a national TV show on this subject of speaking out about race. I'm terrified that our history is being not taught anymore because we have governors of states and other politicians who are burying our history of slavery. And your book has so much attention, you have so much attention, but to do a national TV show would just help in that whole process. Because if we forget our history, it's all over.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your observation, and thank you very much for your question about allyship. Allyship is a verb. And I think we usually see it as a noun instead of a verb. And I think that's the answer, is figuring out if you want to be an ally, what can you do? That doesn't necessarily mean that and it's going to be different for different people. Sometimes being an ally is listening to somebody. Sometimes being an ally is figuring out how to make space for somebody else. That's really important, how to make space for someone else who's not speaking up, who doesn't have a voice. Sometimes it's being curious enough to understand a world outside your own. So if you're going to George Floyd Square, maybe you're a little bit curious about the people who live there. Maybe you want to learn about the restricted covenants in that community. Maybe you want to learn a little bit more about the schools don't look the same. Why don't they look the same? The housing stock is different here. Why is the housing, because oftentimes we think that these things happen and it's just anaerobic. The composition of this neighborhood looks like this because it just kind of happened. No, it didn't just kind of happen. It usually was a series of policy decisions about who gets mortgages and who gets access. And so educating yourself. And that's, your question and your observation were almost in conversation with each other, because part of removing our history is trying to keep us from being informed and to try to close off, those avenues. So figuring out if you want to be an ally, if you want to be an observer, I think that curiosity is a superpower.
I agree with that. I know we are way over on time, but I promise.
If you ask quickly, and
quickly. So, Mary, I'm from Minneapolis. So I have a question. It feels like sometimes we're going back in time with all this anti-DEI legislation, overturning Roe v. Wade. How do you address that? And also, I feel like in Minneapolis, we live in a bubble, and people don't realize what's going on in Gaza is the same thing that happened to Native Americans, and the same thing, it feels like a modern-day apartheid. How do you have this conversation with white Americans specifically?
Okay, we're going to take that, and then Sandra, we're going to hear from you, because I'll do the same thing on this side.
Okay. So this may not seem related, but it is. So first of all, my name is Sandra Richardson. I'm from South Minneapolis, and I'm the co-chair of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Legacy Council. And that council, that committee is the group that pushed for the denial of the dog park in Martin Luther King Jr. Park, and even more importantly, the creation of that playground. And I have to lift up first, there are a number of elders in the audience here tonight who led that fight, and so including my mother, who wants to know if your mother is here, and several others. I know I saw Miss Liz, I saw Miss Sandra, I saw several others, and I also need to lift up your auntie.
Yeah. My
Doris
Aunt
Christopher,
yes.
Miss Doris, because Not only was she a community organizer, but she also was a person who really made it clear that in addition to being against something and getting what you want, you got to have a vision for what you want to have in its place. Because that was a very painful part, division in our community with people across the color line who had worked together before. And so Ms. Doris was first, be gracious when you win, and B, really follow through, okay, and figure out what your legacy is going to be for your community. And so when people talk about what I say is that what is it that you want to leave? What is it you want to show your community? Hey, Robin, what is it you want to show your community that shows you that you were there, that you cared what you left behind? And Ms. Doris just recently passed, less than a month ago, and I just need to raise her up as a person who really led, showing us that vision, what you want to leave behind.
And she's the reason that the Race Card Project came here. Thank you so much. You spoke at her funeral eloquently.
Yes.
And my Aunt Doris and my mother, who couldn't be here tonight, who's listening and watching right now, they both taught me something important also. Hi, Mom. That it's important to engage with people you don't agree with.
Exactly. And it's hard and painful and ugly and nasty, but
and that's one of the reasons I can come to the table and stay at the table, because it was modeled. My mom did that. My mom was a postal worker, and she would often be a mediator, you know, in talking to people when they had disagreements. And so I saw that modeling. I saw that modeled in my life. So thank you for bringing Aunt Doris in the room. We just lost her.
Yep.
And she would definitely be here tonight, and she would be fly as the day is long. You would recognize her. She would definitely represent if she was here. And she might fuss at me for wearing trousers. But as to the other question, how do you have conversations about what's happening in the Middle East? Carefully, but it doesn't mean that you avoid them, because that's tough to have. It's very difficult to talk about. But you figure out, how to do it, and how it feels like we're going backwards. I think that when we talk about what's going on with race in America, it often feels like a foxtrot. You're going forward and backwards, forward and backwards, forward and backwards. The line is not linear, and it's not always forward. I spent the first 5 decades of my life believing that forward progress was inevitable, that we were always, we'd made big evolutions in this country. Not just revolutions, but we've evolved. And because of the ways that we had evolved, I thought that we had moved into a new stage where we would just always be moving forward, and I no longer believe that. And it doesn't mean that I don't believe that we'll move forward. I now understand that we will move forward if people are willing to do the work. And maybe that was a kid who was one generation behind the civil rights movement. My parents, I took things for granted maybe I should not have taken for granted. But now I understand, and Eric Holder, who was here, and some of you probably saw him when he was here, I told him, he's a dear friend, I said, you got to go to Minneapolis. This is a great place. He takes Dr. King's quote and amends it a little bit. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. He adds a few words. He says, but only if we reach out and grab it. And believe me, there are people who are probably trying to grab it and pull it in a different direction, or are just fine if it torques and twists and goes backwards, But that's up to us. And so that's where it's not just talk, it's also work. If you're not going to lose weight if you watch someone on a treadmill. And it doesn't work that way. And you're not going to create a better America unless you roll up your sleeves and say what you want, say what you need, decide that it's worth fighting for, decide that it's worth working for. You don't always have to fight. Sometimes activism whispers, but figure out what you can do and use what you have to do what you can.
On that note, can you all do a big round of applause? Michele Norris, everybody. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Get home safely.